Welcome to Sova Noir Stories. It's time to let go of the day, to breathe slowly, and drift into calm and quiet dreams. Tonight's story will guide you gently into sleep, with soft words, silence, and peace. Close your eyes and let the night begin. The snowstorm came out of nowhere. Dr. Alina Russo had been hiking for 3 hours when the first flakes began to fall. Within minutes, the gentle dusting had transformed into a blinding white wall. The trail disappeared beneath her feet, and the temperature dropped so quickly she could feel ice forming on her eyelashes. She shouldn't have ignored the weather warnings. But after 6 months of endless hospital shifts, of fluorescent lights, and the smell of antiseptic, she had needed this. The mountains, the silence, the chance to breathe air that didn't taste of illness and death. Now, as wind howled around her, and visibility shrank to barely a meter, Alina realized her impulsive escape might have been a fatal mistake. Then, through the swirling snow, she saw it, a structure. A cabin, sturdy and solid, with smoke rising from its chimney. Light glowed from the windows, like a beacon in the storm. Alina stumbled toward it, her legs burning, her fingers numb inside her gloves. She reached the door and pounded on it with all the strength she had left. The door opened almost immediately. The man who stood there was not what she expected. Tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair pulled back, and a beard that framed a face carved from granite. He wore a thick wool sweater and jeans, and his gray eyes widened at the sight of her. "Inside, quickly," he said, his voice deep with a slight German accent. He pulled her in without hesitation and shut the door against the storm. The warmth hit her like a physical force. Alina's knees buckled, but strong hands caught her before she could fall. "Easy," he said, guiding her toward the fireplace. "Sit here. Don't move." Alina sank onto a thick rug in front of the fire, while the stranger moved with practiced efficiency. He disappeared and returned moments later with blankets, which he wrapped around her shoulders. "Your clothes are soaked," he said, kneeling in front of her. "You need to get out of them, or hypothermia will set in." His eyes met hers, and she saw genuine concern there, not threat. "I'll turn around. There are dry clothes on the chair. They'll be too big, but they're warm." Alina's fingers were too numb to work properly. She struggled with her jacket zipper, frustration building as her hands refused to cooperate. "I can't," she whispered, adding the weakness in her voice. The man turned back. "May I help?" She nodded, too cold and exhausted to care about modesty. He moved closer, and his hands, large and surprisingly gentle, worked the zipper down. He helped her out of the jacket, then the wet sweater beneath, his touch clinical and respectful. When she was down to her thermal layer, he handed her the dry clothes and turned away again. "I'm Matthias," he said to the wall. "This is my cabin. You're safe here." "Alina," she managed, pulling on the oversized flannel shirt and wool pants. They smelled like cedar and something else, something warm and masculine that made her feel strangely secure. I'm a doctor. I should have known better than to ignore the weather reports. A doctor who doesn't follow medical advice. She heard the smile in his voice. You may dress now. Matthias turned back and studied her with those penetrating gray eyes. In the firelight, she could see him more clearly now. He was perhaps in his late 30s, with lines around his eyes that spoke of time spent outdoors, squinting against sun and snow. There was something wild about him, but also something deeply calm. How do you feel? He asked. Like I nearly died. You did. Another hour in that storm. He didn't finish the sentence. Are you hungry? As if in answer, her stomach growled loudly. Matthias smiled, the first real smile she'd seen, and it transformed his face from severe to devastating. I'll take that as a yes. He moved to the small kitchen area, and Alina watched him work. The cabin was larger than it had appeared from outside, one main room with the fireplace, kitchen, and living area, and what looked like a bedroom and bathroom through a doorway. Everything was wood and stone, handcrafted and beautiful. Books lined one wall. A guitar sat in the corner. Do you live here year-round? She asked. For the past 3 years, Matthias said, stirring something that smelled incredible on the stove. I used to be an architect in Munich. Corporate offices, shopping centers, soulless glass boxes. He shrugged. One day I realized I was designing spaces where people trapped themselves. So I left. Built this place with my own hands. Now I design furniture, sell it online. It's enough. That's brave. He glanced at her. Or foolish, depending on who you ask. My ex-wife had strong opinions on the matter. They ate at the wooden table, a thick stew with bread he'd baked himself, and wine from a local vineyard. The storm raged outside, but inside the cabin was warm and peaceful. Alina felt herself relaxing for the first time in months. Why medicine? Matthias asked. My father was a doctor. I wanted to save people the way he did. She paused. But he died of a heart attack at 52, working a double shift because the hospital was understaffed. Sometimes I wonder if I'm following his path or his mistakes. And that's why you're here. In the mountains, ignoring weather warnings. Alina met his gaze. Maybe I wanted to feel alive instead of just keeping other people alive. Something flickered in his eyes, understanding, perhaps, or recognition. And do you feel alive? Right now, she was acutely aware of how close they were sitting, of the way the firelight played across his features. Yes, the wind howled louder, and the cabin creaked around them. Matthias went to the window and looked out, his expression darkening. This is worse than I thought, he said. The storm's intensifying. You won't be able to leave tonight. Possibly not tomorrow either. I'm stranded here. Alina felt a flutter of something that wasn't quite fear. Is that a problem? She thought about her empty apartment in the city, the shift she was supposed to work the day after tomorrow, the life that suddenly felt very far away. No, she said honestly, it's not a problem. Matthias turned from the window to look at her, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. Good. The word hung between them, loaded with meaning neither of them had spoken aloud. They talked for hours. About his escape from corporate life, her growing disillusionment with medicine, about the beauty of isolation and the terror of it, about art and healing, building and breaking, the ways people try to make sense of chaos. Matthias poured more wine, and their fingers brushed as he handed her the glass. The contact was brief but electric. You have good hands, Alina said, then immediately felt foolish. I mean, for a craftsman, strong but precise. And you have healer's hands, he replied, reaching out to take her hand in his, examining her fingers with the same attention she'd given his. Though they're trembling. I'm still cold, she lied. His thumb traced across her palm. Liar. Alina's heart hammered. What makes you say that? Because I'm trembling too, and it has nothing to do with the cold. They stood by the window, watching the snow fall in hypnotic sheets. The world beyond the glass had disappeared entirely. They might have been the only two people left alive. I should probably sleep, Alina said, though she made no move to leave. The bedroom is through there, Matthias said, his voice low. I'll take the couch. That doesn't seem fair. This is your home. You nearly died today. You take the bed. He paused, then added, unless you'd prefer company, for warmth. The storms made it quite cold. It was a flimsy excuse, and they both knew it. The cabin was warm, the fire was roaring. But Alina found herself nodding anyway. For warmth, she agreed. His slow smile told her he knew exactly what game they were playing. Of course, purely practical. The bedroom was simple, but beautiful, a large bed, with a thick duvet, more books. A single lamp casting golden light. Windows looked out into the storm, but heavy curtains could shut out the world entirely. Alina stood awkwardly, suddenly aware of what she'd agreed to. Matthias sensed her hesitation. I can still take the couch, he said gently. I won't be offended. No, she turned to face him. I want you to stay. It's been a long time since I've done this. Done what? Shared a bed with a stranger during a snowstorm. His eyes crinkled with amusement. I imagine it's a rare occurrence. That made her laugh, and the tension eased slightly. You know what I mean. I do. He stepped closer, reaching out to tuck a strand of her dark hair behind her ear. The gesture was tender, almost achingly so. We don't have to do anything but sleep, Alina. I meant what I said about warmth. Sometimes the most intimate thing is simply being present with another person. They sat on the edge of the bed, and Matthias told her about the first winter in the cabin, when he'd nearly given up and returned to the city. How he'd learned to read the mountain's moods, to respect its power while not fearing it. How silence had terrified him at first, but now it was his greatest comfort. Don't you get lonely? Alina asked. Sometimes. But loneliness in solitude is different from loneliness in a crowd. At least here, I'm honest about it. He looked at her. What about you? Are you lonely, Dr. Russo? No one had asked her that in years. The question cracked something open inside her. Yes, she whispered. All the time. I'm surrounded by people every day, but I feel like I'm watching life happen from behind glass. Matthias took her hand in his, lacing their fingers together. Then maybe we're both lucky. Tonight, neither of us has to be alone. They lay down together under the thick covers, facing each other in the lamplight. Outside, the storm continued its assault on the cabin, but inside was warm and still. Tell me something true, Matthias said, echoing her earlier honesty. Something you've never told anyone. Alina thought about it, studying his face, the sharp angles, the surprising softness in his eyes. There was something about this moment, this strange suspension from real life, that made honesty feel not just possible, but necessary. I'm afraid I've forgotten how to feel, she said. 6 months ago, I lost a patient, a child. I did everything right by the book, but she died anyway. And since then, it's like I've been moving through water. Everything's muffled and distant. I came to the mountains hoping I'd feel something again. And do you? His thumb stroked across her knuckles. Feel something? Yes, she moved closer until only inches separated them. I feel everything right now. Too much, maybe. There's no such thing as too much feeling, Matthias murmured. Not after going numb. He kissed her then, soft and questioning. Alina answered by pressing closer, her hand sliding up to cup his bearded jaw. The kiss deepened slowly, a gradual exploration rather than a rush. His hand found the small of her back, pulling her against him, and she could feel the solid warmth of him through the layers of clothing. When they broke apart, both breathing harder, Matthias rested his forehead against hers. I've been alone in these mountains for 3 years, he said, his voice rough. I thought I preferred it that way. Then you appeared at my door, half frozen and fierce, and suddenly isolation feels like the loneliest thing in the world. Alina's heart clenched. I don't want to go back, she admitted. To the hospital, to the city, to that life. I want to stay here in this moment where everything makes sense. Then stay. For tonight, at least. Tomorrow we'll worry about storms and obligations and the real world. But tonight, we're nowhere. We're no one. We're just this. They held each other as the storm raged, trading kisses and whispered confessions. Matthias told her about the marriage that had fallen apart because he couldn't be the man his wife wanted. Alina told him about the walls she'd built around herself, so high and so thick she'd forgotten what it felt like to let someone in. I see you, Matthias whispered against her hair. The real you, not the doctor or the dutiful daughter or whatever role you play. I see the woman who hiked into a storm because she needed to feel alive. Tears pricked Alina's eyes. I see you too. The man who builds beautiful things with his hands, who chose truth over comfort. They made love slowly, tenderly, as if they had all the time in the world. There was no rush, no performance, just two people finding warmth and connection in the midst of isolation. Afterwards, they lay tangled together, skin against skin, listening to the wind howl. Alina woke to silence. The storm had passed. Early morning light filtered through the windows, illuminating millions of snow crystals that had transformed the world outside into something from a fairy tale. Matthias still slept beside her, one arm draped across her waist. In sleep, his face had softened, and she could see the young man he must have been before life had carved its marks into him. She should get up, check her phone, call for rescue, return to her real life. But she didn't want to move, didn't want to break this spell. As if sensing her thoughts, Matthias stirred. His eyes opened, and when he saw her, he smiled slow and genuine and beautiful. "Good morning," he murmured, pulling her closer. "How do you feel?" "Alive," Alina said simply. They had coffee by the window, wrapped in blankets, watching the sun rise over the snow-covered peaks. The world was pristine, untouched, blindingly beautiful. "The roads will be closed for at least 2 more days," Matthias said. "Maybe 3, depending on when they can get the plows up here. So I'm still stranded." He looked at her, and something vulnerable flickered in his eyes. Would that be so terrible? Alina set down her coffee cup and moved into his arms. "No," she said against his chest, feeling his heart beat steady and strong beneath her cheek. It wouldn't be terrible at all. They spent those days in a bubble outside of time. Matthias showed her his workshop, where he shaped wood into furniture that was both functional and artistic. She helped him prepare meals, learning to bake bread, to appreciate the meditative quality of simple tasks done well. In the evenings, they talked by the fire, or made love in the big bed while snow fell softly outside. He played guitar and sang in a voice that surprised her with its beauty. She read aloud from his collection of poetry, something she hadn't done since college. On the 3rd day, they heard the distant sound of snowplows working their way up the mountain. "The road will be clear by tomorrow," Matthias said quietly. They were lying in bed, her head on his chest, his fingers trailing through her hair. "You'll be able to leave." Alina's throat tightened. "I know, but you don't have to. Leave, I mean." He tilted her face up to look at him. "I know this has been strange, surreal even, but it's also been the most real thing I've experienced in years. Stay longer, a week, a month, however long you want." Alina sat up, pulling the blanket around herself. "Matthias, I have a life, a job, patients who depend on me. Do you love it, that life?" The question hung between them. Alina thought about the hospital, the endless shifts, the exhaustion that went bone deep. She thought about her empty apartment, the takeout meals eaten alone, the way she'd stopped calling her friends because she was too tired to pretend to be okay. No, she admitted, but I don't know how to leave it either. You left it 3 days ago. You walked into a storm because something in you knew you needed to escape. He took her hands in his. I'm not asking you to marry me or commit to forever. I'm just asking if you want to stay a little longer, to see if this feeling lasts when the snow melts and reality creeps back in. What if it doesn't last? What if this is just cabin fever or proximity, or then you leave, and we'll both have had something beautiful for a moment. His thumb traced circles on her palm. But what if it does last? What if you walk away from this and spend the rest of your life wondering? That night, Alina stood at the window alone while Matthias slept. Her phone, finally charged, showed dozens of messages. The hospital, frantic. Her mother, worried. Friends she hadn't spoken to in months, suddenly concerned about her absence. She could call them back, make excuses, arrange for someone to pick her up tomorrow. Return to the city, to the hospital, to the life she'd built out of expectations and shoulds, and the weight of her father's legacy. Or she could delete the messages, call the hospital and give her notice. Walk away from the glass box she'd trapped herself in, the way Matthias had. The choice crystallized with sudden clarity. Fear or courage, numbness or feeling, existing or living. Alina looked back at the bed, where Matthias slept peacefully. This man who'd literally saved her life and then shown her how to live it. She thought about his hands shaping wood, his voice rough with emotion, the way he looked at her like she was something precious and rare. She thought about the person she'd been when she stumbled through that door, half frozen, desperate, lost. And the person she was now warm, awake, found. She slipped back into bed, and Matthias stirred, pulling her close without waking. Alina pressed her face against his chest and made her decision. Tomorrow she would make the calls, but not to arrange rescue, to arrange freedom. 3 months later, she would start working at the small clinic in the valley, where she knew every patient's name, and no one died on fluorescent-lit tables. She would learn to build furniture alongside Matthias, her hands learning the language of wood and patience. She would discover that love didn't have to be complicated, that sometimes it was as simple as 2 people choosing each other, over and over, every day. But she didn't know any of that yet. For now, in this moment, she simply held onto the man who taught her that getting lost sometimes meant finding your way home. Outside, it began to snow again, gentle flakes drifting down like a blessing. Inside the cabin, 2 people slept in each other's arms, no longer strangers, no longer alone. The storm that had brought them together had passed, but they remained, choosing each other, choosing this, choosing to be brave enough to feel everything, even when it terrified them, because sometimes salvation arrives in a snowstorm. Sometimes it looks like a stranger's door opening. Sometimes it's a hand reaching out in the dark, saying you're safe here. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, It's the moment you realize that being found was what you'd been searching for all along. Sleep well, and may you always have the courage to walk into storms, knowing that on the other side might be exactly what you've been looking for. Good night. The rain came down in sheets, turning the city streets into rivers of light and shadow. Isabel stood under the gallery awning, shaking droplets from her coat, watching the storm transform the world outside into something from an impressionist painting. She was late, fashionably late, her friend Maya would have said, though Isabel suspected it was just regular late. Through the glass doors, she could see the vernissage in full swing. Bodies moved through the stark white space like elegant shadows, wine glasses catching the light, laughter floating out into the rain-soaked evening. This wasn't usually her scene. Isabel preferred her art in books, in quiet museums on weekday afternoons, when she could stand alone before a painting and let it speak to her without the noise of critics and collectors. But Maya had insisted. "You need to get out of that apartment," she'd said over coffee that morning. "You've been hiding since the divorce. Come to the opening. Free wine, beautiful art, and who knows, maybe you'll meet someone interesting." Isabel had laughed at that last part. She wasn't looking to meet anyone. After 8 years of marriage that had slowly fossilized into polite cohabitation, she was learning to be alone. Learning to remember who she'd been before she'd become half of a we. Still, here she was. She pushed through the glass doors and stepped into another world. The gallery was stunning, all clean lines and perfectly positioned spotlights that made each painting glow like it contained its own source of light. The art itself was bold, almost aggressive in its sensuality. Abstract forms that suggested bodies without showing them, colors that bled into each other like passion and pain mixing on skin. Isabel accepted a glass of wine from a passing server and began to move through the space, letting the crowd flow around her. She was searching for Maya, but found herself drawn instead to the paintings. There was something raw about them, something that spoke to a part of her she'd kept carefully locked away during her marriage. "They're magnificent, aren't they?" The voice came from behind her low, with a slight accent she couldn't immediately place. Mediterranean, perhaps. Italian or Spanish. Isabel turned and found herself looking into the darkest eyes she'd ever seen. He was tall, dressed entirely in black turtleneck, slacks, leather jacket that looked expensive and well-worn. His hair was dark and slightly too long, pushed back from a face that was all angles and intensity. He held a glass of wine, but hadn't drunk from it, and he was looking at her with the same focused attention she'd been giving the painting. "I'm sorry," he said, a slight smile playing at the corner of his mouth. "I didn't mean to startle you. I'm Dante Rossellini." The name clicked. "You're the artist." Guilty. His smile widened, and Isabel felt something flutter in her chest that she hadn't felt in years. "And you are someone who actually looks at the paintings instead of the price tags. That makes you rare in a room like this. Isabel laughed despite herself. Isabel Laurent. And I should probably admit I have no idea what the price tags say. I'm here because my friend insisted I needed to get out more. And do you need to get out more? There was something in the way he asked it, not flirtatious exactly, but genuinely curious, as if her answer mattered. Isabel found herself being honest in a way she rarely was with strangers. Probably I've been hibernating, I suppose, recovering from a life that didn't fit anymore. Dante's dark eyes studied her face, and she felt exposed in a way that should have been uncomfortable, but somehow wasn't. I understand that, he said quietly. Sometimes we have to burn down the old life before we can build something new. These paintings, he gestured around the gallery, they're about that. Destruction and creation. The beautiful violence of transformation. Is that what the critics are saying? Isabel asked, gesturing to a group of well-dressed people across the room who were talking animatedly. I have no idea. I stopped listening to critics years ago. He moved slightly closer, and Isabel caught his scent, something woody and warm, with a hint of paint thinner underneath. They want to put everything in neat boxes, assign meaning and value. But art isn't about that. It's about what happens here. He touched his chest. When you stand in front of something that speaks to the parts of yourself you usually keep hidden. Isabel's breath caught. She looked back at the painting. They'd been standing in front of a swirl of deep reds and blacks, with touches of gold that seemed to shimmer in the light. Now that he'd said it, she could see it. Passion and pain, beauty and destruction, all tangled together in a way that made her chest ache. What do you see when you look at it? Dante asked, his voice low. Longing, Isabel said without thinking. Then, embarrassed by her honesty, she added, but I'm probably projecting. There's no such thing as projecting in art. There's only feeling. And longing, he paused, his eyes moving from the painting back to her face. Longing is what makes us human. It's the space between what we have and what we want. That tension is where everything interesting happens. They stood in silence for a moment, both looking at the painting. But Isabel was acutely aware of his presence beside her. The crowd seemed to fade away, the noise becoming distant and unimportant. Come with me, Dante said suddenly. There's something I want to show you. He didn't wait for her answer, just started walking toward the back of the gallery. Isabel hesitated for only a moment before following. There was something magnetic about him, something that made caution feel like a waste of time. He led her through a doorway marked private and down a short corridor. At the end was another door, which he opened to reveal a smaller room, a studio space, with paintings in various stages of completion leaning against the walls. The smell of oil paint thick in the air. This is where I work when I'm in the city, Dante explained, closing the door behind them. The noise from the gallery immediately muffled, leaving them in intimate silence. The gallery lets me use it during shows. The chaos out there, he gestured back toward the main room, it's necessary. But it's not real. This is real. Isabel walked slowly through the space, looking at the unfinished works. They were even more powerful than the completed pieces in the gallery, raw, unpolished, full of visible struggle and revision. Some canvases had been painted over multiple times, ghost images showing through the top layers like memories that wouldn't quite fade. "Why are you showing me this?" she asked, turning to find Dante watching her with that same intense focus. "Because you're the first person tonight who looked at my work and actually felt something. Everyone else out there is thinking about their investment portfolios or what the Times critic will say." He moved closer, and Isabel's heart began to race. "But you understood what I was trying to say. That doesn't happen often. I'm not anyone special," Isabel said, but her voice came out softer than she intended. "I'm just a woman who's had too much wine and is projecting her failed marriage onto your art." "Failed marriage," Dante repeated, stopping in front of her. They were close now, close enough that she had to tilt her head back slightly to maintain eye contact. "Is that what you're recovering from, among other things? Turns out, spending 8 years trying to be someone you're not is exhausting." "Who were you trying to be?" The question caught her off guard. "Someone quieter, more contained. My ex-husband liked things calm and predictable. No mess, no passion, no," she gestured around at the paint-splattered studio. "No beautiful violence." Dante's expression softened. "That sounds like a slow death." It was. Isabel was surprised by the relief she felt saying it out loud. "But I'm supposed to be past all this now. It's been almost a year. I should have moved on." "Should," Dante practically spat the word. "That's the most dangerous word in any language. Should is how we betray ourselves." He reached out, and for a moment Isabel thought he was going to touch her face, but instead he picked up a paintbrush from the table beside them. "Should is the enemy of art, of life, of anything worth doing." "You make it sound simple," Isabel said. "It is simple. Not easy simple. You either live according to what other people think you should do, or you live according to what makes you feel alive." He set down the brush and did touch her then, his fingers gentle on her chin, tilting her face up toward his. "So let me ask you, Isabel Laurent, what makes you feel alive?" The question hung in the air between them. Isabel could hear her own heartbeat, feel the warmth radiating from his body. The smart thing would be to step back, to make some excuse and return to the safety of the crowd, to be sensible and contained, and all the things she'd trained herself to be. Instead, she said, "I don't know anymore. I think I forgot." "Then maybe," Dante said, his thumb tracing along her jawline, "it's time to remember." He kissed her then, not tentatively, not asking permission, but with the same bold confidence he brought to his art. Isabel's first instinct was to pull back, to retreat into caution. But something in her refused. Instead, she leaned into the kiss, her hands finding his chest, feeling his heart pounding as hard as hers. When they broke apart, both breathing harder, Dante rested his forehead against hers. "Come home with me," he said. It wasn't a question, wasn't a demand, just an invitation, laid out simply and honestly. "I don't do this," Isabel said. "I don't kiss strangers in private rooms. I don't go home with artists I just met. I'm not that person." "Maybe you are," Dante suggested. "And you just haven't let yourself be her yet." The rain had intensified by the time they left the gallery, sneaking out through a side entrance while the vernissage continued without them. Dante's apartment was only a few blocks away, but they were both soaked by the time they arrived, laughing and breathless. His building was old, the kind with a cage elevator and marble stairs worn smooth by a century of feet. His apartment was on the top floor, a converted loft with exposed brick walls, enormous windows that looked out over the rain-slicked city, and art everywhere. Not just paintings, but sculptures, sketches tacked to the walls, books stacked in precarious towers. "Sorry about the mess," Dante said, though he didn't sound particularly sorry. "I'm not very good at the domestic arts." "It's perfect," Isabel said honestly. The space felt lived in, creative, real in a way her carefully decorated apartment never had. "It looks like someone actually exists here." Dante smiled at that. "Let me get you a towel and maybe some dry clothes." He disappeared into what she assumed was the bedroom, leaving Isabel alone to explore. She walked slowly through the space, looking at everything. The art on the walls was a mixture of his own work and pieces by other artists, some famous, some she didn't recognize. There were photographs, too, scattered throughout. A woman who must have been his mother, laughing in a kitchen, a group of men in paint-stained clothes, arms around each other, a view of what looked like the Italian countryside, all rolling hills and ancient buildings. "This was my grandmother's house," Dante said, returning with towels and an oversized shirt. "Outside Florence. I spent every summer there as a boy. She was the one who taught me to paint." "She must have been special," Isabel said, taking the towel and beginning to dry her hair. "She was a force of nature, completely inappropriate, always saying exactly what she thought, scandalizing the neighbors." His eyes were soft with memory. "She told me that art isn't about making beautiful things. It's about telling the truth, even when the truth is ugly or uncomfortable or doesn't fit in polite conversation." "I would have liked to meet her. She would have liked you too. She had a gift for recognizing kindred spirits." Isabel paused in her toweling. "Is that what we are? Kindred spirits?" Dante moved closer, taking the towel from her hands and setting it aside. "I don't know what we are yet, but I know that when I saw you looking at my painting, really looking at it, I felt something I haven't felt in a long time. Recognition, maybe, or possibility." "Possibility," Isabel repeated. She liked the word, the way it suggested openness rather than definition. I can work with possibility. He smiled, and this time when he kissed her, it was slower, deeper, an exploration rather than a declaration. His hands found her waist, pulling her closer, and Isabel let herself sink into the sensation. This was what she'd been missing. She realized not just physical touch, but this feeling of being fully present in her own body, of wanting and being wanted without apology or restraint. They made their way to the bedroom without ever fully breaking the kiss, stumbling over art supplies and furniture, laughing breathlessly. The bedroom was dominated by an enormous bed covered in white linens that looked soft as clouds, and more windows that showed the storm still raging outside. "Are you sure about this?" Dante asked, and Isabel appreciated that he was giving her an out, a chance to change her mind. But she didn't want an out. She wanted this, wanted him, wanted to feel alive in her own skin again, wanted to stop living in the careful space between who she'd been and who she might become. "I'm sure," she said, and reached for him. They made love with the storm as soundtrack, rain drumming against the windows, while lightning occasionally lit up the room in silver flashes. Dante was attentive and intense, focused on her pleasure with the same concentration he brought to his art. And Isabel discovered parts of herself she'd forgotten existed, a wildness, a capacity for abandon that had been buried under years of careful containment. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the soft sheets, skin against skin, listening to the rain begin to ease. "Tell me something true," Dante said, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. "Something you've never told anyone." Isabel thought about it. In the darkness, with this near stranger who somehow didn't feel like a stranger at all, honesty felt possible in a way it rarely did. "I'm afraid I wasted the best years of my life," she said quietly. "I'm 34, and I feel like I'm just waking up. Like I've been asleep for a decade, and now everything I thought I wanted is gone, and I have to start over, and I don't know if I'm brave enough." Dante was quiet for a moment, his hand stilling on her skin. Then he said, "I lost 5 years to heroin." Isabel turned in his arms to look at him. "What?" "In my 20s. I was young and arrogant and thought I needed to suffer for my art. Turns out suffering just makes you suffer. It doesn't make the art any better." He met her eyes in the darkness. "I got clean, but those years are gone. I can't get them back. And sometimes I wake up angry about it, furious that I wasted so much time being half alive." "What do you do when you feel that way?" "I paint. I create something new. I try to remember that every moment is a chance to start again." He pulled her closer. "And I try not to waste the time I have left wishing I'd made different choices. The only choice that matters is the one you make right now." They fell asleep as the storm finally passed, and woke to morning light filtering through the rain-washed windows. Isabel surfaced slowly from sleep, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar room, the warm body beside hers. Then memory flooded back, and she felt a smile spread across her face. Dante was already awake, propped up on one elbow, watching her with a soft expression. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning." Isabel stretched, feeling wonderfully, deliciously used. "I should probably go. I'm sure you have things to do, and I—" "Stay," Dante interrupted. "Have breakfast with me at least. Unless you have somewhere you need to be." Isabel thought about her empty apartment, the lonely Saturday stretching ahead of her. "No," she admitted. "I don't have anywhere I need to be." "Good." He kissed her forehead and climbed out of bed, completely unself-conscious in his nakedness. "I'll make coffee. There's a robe in the closet if you want it." She watched him walk out of the room, admiring the casual grace of his movement, the play of muscles under skin, the paint stains that marked his hands and forearms. This was real, she thought. This messy, imperfect, surprising thing was more real than anything she'd experienced in years. The kitchen was small but well used, with copper pots hanging from hooks and herbs growing in pots on the windowsill. Dante moved through the space with easy efficiency, grinding coffee beans, pulling out a pan for eggs. "Do you cook?" Isabel asked, wrapped in the robe he'd offered, sitting at the small table by the window. "I have to, otherwise I'd starve." He glanced back at her with a grin. "I'm Italian. Not cooking would be a betrayal of my heritage." They ate breakfast as the city came to life outside the windows, and talked about everything and nothing. He told her about growing up in Florence, about the moment he realized he wanted to be an artist. She told him about her work as a translator, about the pleasure she found in carrying meaning between languages, the careful attention required to preserve not just words, but intention and feeling. "That's like painting," Dante said, "trying to translate what you feel into something visible. It always loses something in the translation, but you do it anyway because the attempt matters. Is that why you paint? To translate feeling?" "I paint because if I don't, I disappear. The feeling builds up inside until I can't breathe, and the only way to let it out is to put it on canvas." He reached across the table and took her hand. "Last night, when I saw you looking at my work, you were reading my translation, understanding what I was trying to say. Do you know how rare that is?" Isabel felt tears prick her eyes, though she couldn't have explained why. "I felt seen," she said. "When you showed me your studio, when we talked, I felt like you were seeing me, the real me, not the version I show the world. Maybe that's what art is supposed to do. Help us see each other clearly, without all the bullshit we usually hide behind." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, hands linked across the table, morning light warming the kitchen. Outside, the city was washed clean by the storm, everything bright and new. "I should tell you," Isabel said eventually, "I'm not looking for a relationship. I'm barely divorced. I'm still figuring out who I am. I can't make promises about tomorrow." "Good," Dante said, surprising her. "I'm terrible at relationships. I'm selfish with my time, obsessive about my work, completely unreliable when I'm in the middle of a piece. My ex-wife used to say living with me was like living with a ghost. Then what is this? Isabel gestured between them. Last night, this morning, what are we doing? Dante stood and came around the table, pulling her up and into his arms. We're living, he said simply. Right now, in this moment. No promises, no plans, just this. He kissed her again, and Isabel felt something settle in her chest, not certainty, but something better. Permission. Permission to be messy, to be uncertain, to be in the process of becoming rather than arrived at some fixed destination. I'd like to see you again, she said when they broke apart. If you want to. I want to, he smiled, that devastating smile that made her knees weak. I want to paint you, actually. Would you model for me? I've never modeled before. Perfect. I don't want someone who knows how to pose. I want you exactly as you are. As Isabel finally left his apartment that afternoon, stepping out into the clean-washed city, she felt different than she had the night before. Not fixed, not healed, she wasn't sure those words even made sense, but alive, awake, open to whatever came next. She pulled out her phone and saw a dozen messages from Maya, increasingly frantic. Where are you? Are you okay? Did you get kidnapped by a sexy artist? Isabel smiled and typed back, something like that. Tell you everything later. As she walked through the Sunday streets, Isabel thought about possibility, about the space between what we have and what we want, and how that tension is where everything interesting happens. About burning down old lives to make room for new ones. About the beautiful violence of transformation. She thought about Dante's hands, paint-stained and gentle. About his studio filled with unfinished work, ghosts of previous attempts showing through the surface. About the way he'd looked at her, really looked at her, and seen something worth painting. And she thought about the painting that had started it all, that swirl of red and black and gold. Longing, she'd called it. The space between what we have and what we want. Maybe that space didn't have to be painful. Maybe it could be beautiful instead. Full of possibility and promise, of mornings after storms, of new beginnings that arrived disguised as endings. Isabel smiled to herself and kept walking, rain-washed city bright around her, feeling more alive than she had in years. Sleep well, and may you always have the courage to follow what makes you feel alive, even when it leads you to unexpected places. May you find art that speaks to your hidden self and people who see you clearly.